Welcome to Globespan. I'm Paul Nehru, Tennessee, and today we have a packed guest list and panelists, and we are discussing two questions. Is Guyanese society broken? How can it be repaired? I will not do extensive introductions of our guests because they have very extensive experience, not only on this subject, but on the multiple issues and disciplines. So I'll immediately go into the subject. We'll divide the program into about three parts. The first part, let's deal with how is Guyanese society broken? Because people may have views on that. And then as we complete that, then we will go, if people believe it is, how to fix it. So I'll start with author of a book. I had the privilege of going to a presentation here in Maryland. Dr. Amala Luncheon wrote a book on everyday lessons in emotional intelligence, a Caribbean perspective. She co-authored it with a very popular Trinidadian Tobagan, Terin Jaiga, who is a talk show host on radio in Trinidad, and I heard both of them speak. So I will ask Amala to begin by sharing with us her perspective on these two, on the first question.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be a part of this panel. Not sure I'm excited to go first, but let's see how that goes. I think that we ought to look at or probably define the lens that we decide whether something is broken or not. And as a social scientist, I would probably look at it from different lens than someone who is in a different profession. And one of the first things I would probably say is there has been some sort of breakdown from when my parents were children. We were having these discussions prior to getting on about parents being teachers and so on. And so we know that there's some level of discipline that existed now that may just not be there, where at least in the past, you could have elders reprimand people and it would be okay because it really did take a village. Now we get to the point where people are doing things for the benefit of social media. And, they're doing things for likes and they're doing things for popularity and becoming influencers and so on. And so the approach may be a little bit different. But is society broken? The short answer could be yes. And it could be related to, one, the increase in crime that we see, and perhaps Timothy can talk about that because, he probably sees like high rates of recidivism and stuff like that, I would assume, because I haven't done the research on it, but, from reading newspapers and so on, that you have repeat offenders, that I'm not even sure what this sort of rehabilitation programs are like. But yes, I would say that society is broken. And I would also say, yes, it can be repaired. And it can be repaired. The first thing I would say is mentorship, because it starts with us. Each of us has to decide that we're in a position to make a difference. And I think having fora like this is actually a good step. So I would leave that as my opening statement and go back to you.
Well, now thank you very much. I'll call on Mr. Lakshman Singh, who is a forest governance facilitator. Well, Mr. Lakshman Singh has a lot of experience in Guyana. He lives in Guyana currently, and he has a lot of experience on governance, civil society, conflict transformation, and he was even identified as a potential head of the GCOM, that problematic institution we deal with. So if he was put on a list for GCOM, then he must be an expert on conflict. So, Brother Lakshman Singh, please share your view on the first question for us.
Thank you, Paul, and thanks for having me on the show. Thanks for all of your colleagues who are working hard behind the scenes to make this show happen. The question about whether Guyanese society is broken, I was thinking about it before the show. If you have a bone that's fractured, they say it's broken, but it's not actually snapped in two. So when we think of broken, we think of like a stick and it snaps in two, and then how do you fix that back? But if it's fractured, it's still a kind of a brick. It's just not gone far enough to snap in two. And I was reflecting that I think we're fractured, but I don't think we're fully snapped or broken in what I think the society would understand as broken. We are, if you will, we are kind of like Humpty Dumpty falling off the wall in slow motion. We ain't fall off yet, but we're kind of going in that direction if we don't take care. And the reason why I would say that we're fractured is that, we have a lot of diversity. That's our strength. But at the same time, these fractures, these divisions are exacerbated by a number of factors in our society. In many of your previous shows, you've talked about elections, about ethnicity, about the ethno-political conflict. But I would want to focus, particularly since one of the roles I'm representing here is a member of the Justice and Peace Commission of the Roman Catholic Church. I think for us, we're very worried that the injection of materialism, material things, money, as a driver in how the society is trying to organize itself. I know we're poor. I'm not trying to say we shouldn't reduce poverty. Don't get me wrong. But I think in the quest for increased prosperity, especially with this oil and gas thing going on, I worry that our society is becoming very competitive to the point of dysfunction and social enmity. You just have to drive on the roads just to understand what I'm talking about, where there's this intense competition, even for road space, even when there are clear lines and clear lanes and clear red light, green light, orange light, there's still this competition for, I must have a space in front of you. And I'm worried that what we're introducing through the economic system is actually encouraging a kind of a perverse competition among citizens where we no longer care so much about each other, but actually much more about ourselves. And that kind of selfishness, I don't think is a foundation for any kind of progressive society. So I know I've taken a slightly different angle on the question of whether the society is broken or not. I think it's at a worrying stage. There's still a lot that's positive, though. I want to just end my initial comment on this point. Guyana is still an incredibly beautiful place. And if you look enough, if your mind is open enough, you're going to see beautiful things. I see Adriana has just joined. I know Adriana and I share this view that Guyana is an incredibly beautiful place with beautiful people that do beautiful things all the time. Let's not throw the baby with the bathwater on this. I think the glass is more than half full, but we do need to worry about that segment of our society that is feeling hurt. I'll get into some more of the analysis a bit later in terms of why we're broken, because I think that will probably lead us to the question of how it can be repaired. Thanks very much for the opportunity to give this opening introductions remarks.
Welcome, Adriana. Thanks for being on the program. And Adriana, we will invite you to share with us the first question, your reflection. Is Guyanese society broken?
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the program. It's really good to be here with Lawrence and I. We've come a long way in development. And it's really a pleasure to be a part of this panel of Guyanese who really love their country and would like to see change. I do believe that the Guyanese society is broken. And I believe that that's a good starting point. Because in order for us to, I hope that we'll talk a lot about change and how change happens. And but in order for us to change the Guyanese society or affect change in the Guyanese society, we first of all have to admit that something is wrong. And so my short answer is yes, the Guyanese society is broken, very broken.
Okay.
And I can expand at different levels because my discussion will focus on broken at the individual level. It's broken at the institutional level.
Adriana, can you go ahead and share your view with us? Because, you know, there are a lot of guests on the program. So if you could get your story ahead of time, it would be great. When we come to the second part, where it will be repaired, then you have another session. So go ahead and expound.
Of course. Of course. So I would like to address the issue of whether the Guyanese society is broken from one, it is broken at the individual level, it is broken at the institutional level, and it is broken at the societal level. And when we get to can it be fixed, I will also examine that it can be fixed at the individual level, at the institutional level, and at the societal level. One of the other aspects of that has contributed towards the brokenness in the Guyanese society, I think it's broken at the psychologically, we are very broken. And I think that it's, we will, in terms of fixing Guyana, we have to look at strengthening our institutions, but we also have to look at that psychological component. Because I believe that Guyana really has a civil war, but it's at a psychological level. It's not necessarily at the level at where people are out in the streets and they're fighting, but one, it's virtual with the new social media and the like. So the civil war is happening virtually, that's one. And two, it's psychological. And so we have to, first of all, be honest about our history. And I don't think that we have been very honest about our history as yet. So if we're going to talk about fixing Guyana, we have to be honest about our history. And I can give you the case of Rwanda. One of the things we keep saying in Guyana is that once blood has been shed, it's hard to move forward. I've heard that for years, but I think Rwanda has shattered that argument, because in 1994, 800,000 Rwandans died in the civil war in less than 100 days. And Rwanda, about 1 decade after that, they were able to pull themselves together, pull the country together. And Rwanda, for the past 10 years prior to COVID-19, was a 7.5% annual growth economy. Rwanda was the fastest growing African country prior to COVID-19 in 2020. So when we say in Guyana that once blood has been shed, what has happened in the 60s is hard to move forward, I do not buy that in 2021, because Rwanda, 800,000 people, it means that every single Guyanese would have died in the case of Rwanda. And yet Rwanda was, and a few more also, because we're about 782,000 people. And yet Rwanda was able to move past that. So let's examine some of what Rwanda did. The African Union played a fundamental role in terms of helping Rwanda to recover. Let's find out from the African Union, what is it that they did? There were other countries. I also would like to say that while we're talking here in Guyana about how, first of all, we see Guyana as a huge, complicated and complex country. Guyana is not complicated. Guyana is neither complicated nor complex. China is complicated and complex. They have 1.6 billion people. India is complicated and complex. They have 1.3 billion people. The United States of America is complicated and complex. They have 236 million people, and they're the largest economy in the world. Mumbai as a city in India is complicated. It has 30 million people. 30 million people is half of the population in India, sorry. They are complicated. Guyana with 782,000 people, and all of these natural resources. Guyana is neither complex nor complicated. I'll end here by saying Guyana will now become complicated and complex because of the geopolitics around oil. And so now we will become complex and complicated. But that's another issue that we will get to. But we see Guyana as if Guyana is this huge, big, complex problem. And I think until we address the fact that Guyana is a small 83,000 square miles country with 782,000 people, Indians, Amerindians, Africans, Portuguese, who after 55 years, they are so integrated, and integrated means interconnected and interdependent. I don't think that we really understand how interdependent Blacks are and Indians are and Blacks, and Portuguese are and Blacks and Indians, and Amerindians are. I don't think we really understand that. At the level of our politics, my final point on this, at the level of our politics, I think that we have not yet integrated, but at the level of the society, we are well integrated after 55 years. We are integrated, meaning interconnected, interdependent. And the last point, final point on this is our school system. I give major credit to our school system from nursery to university in terms of that developing a society that is interconnected and interdependent. Where the gaps are in terms of developing common values and common principles as it relates to some of the things that Lawrence was mentioning just now. That we need to develop common values, common principles, and common interests. And I think that's where our leadership will come in.
Thank you very much, Adriana. And I'm glad you mentioned Rwanda, because it presents to us both, shows to us both sides, as you said. I spent a week in Brussels with a Hutu friend of mine, and he and his sister, he was in his house, saw his father head chopped off, mother head chopped off, all the other relatives in front of him. He ran through the back door, and his sister, and they didn't stop running for 3 weeks all across to get to some place where they could be safe. And I've never met a human being so humane, so calm. How he overcome that, I do not know, but I spent a week with him, and it was virtually a spiritual experience. So I agree with you. Sometimes in the worst of situations, there is hope. And I've lived through the 60s in Guyana as a young boy, the 70s, the 80s, and so forth. So thank you very much.
I'd just like to make one point before you move on. I'd like to, for change to happen, there's a theory that change happens either through something traumatic or through something dramatic, or it can be as a factor of both. In Rwanda, I think it was both. It was both dramatic and both traumatic. For profound change to happen in Guyana, it's what you call, the civil war was a trigger in Rwanda. For change to happen, you need a trigger. Currently, I'm examining whether the oil and gas element is sufficiently a trigger to trigger the kinds of profound change that we need in Guyana. I'm beginning to see some indications. I'm still doing my analysis to determine whether it is sufficient. But what we need for that profound change to happen, we need a trigger. And oil and gas could be that trigger.
Okay, thank you again. Timothy, what's your perspective on the first question? Everybody knows Timothy, right? He's a regular on this program. He's a senior counsel, and he's the chair of ANUG, possibly another presidential candidate. He'll be competing with Adriana most likely, and I'll be a consultant to both of them at a reasonable price.
This is my first time meeting Ms. Thomas. I'm very pleased to meet you and happy to hear what you've said.
It's a pleasure, Mr. Jonas. My pleasure.
It was an interesting start to the conversation, Paul. Dr. Luncheon spoke about the village that we all have fond memories of, where neighbors knew neighbors and children had a sense of security in that environment. And Lawrence contrasted that with what he saw as an increase in money focus, commercialism, and competition that we experience today. I think that to describe the society as broken is a bit of a headline seeker. A watch is broken, or a computer is broken, a laptop is broken. A society is a complex and evolving creature, and it changes every second, let alone every generation.
I I remember reading as a boy, John Adams, second U.S. president, said, "I am a soldier so that my son can be a merchant and his son could be a poet." And I think what he was assuming there is that society evolves and you do what you have to do so as to make things better for the next generation to come. I think what he also was assuming, and for me this is fundamental, he said, and you'll forgive me, he was speaking in the early 1800s and therefore it was male dominated. So he spoke about himself and his son's son. But he was assuming the integrity of the family unit. And for me, that is an important development that we need to see in Guyana as part of our evolution to fix what is a society that has a lot of issues right now. But what we need to remember too is that everybody, once that family unit is there, wants the best for their children and wants the best for their spouse. So that you may be a criminal, a laborer, a drug dealer, a crook, but you don't want that for your child. You want your child to go to the best schools and you want your child to live a life better than you lived. So that you want to be upwardly mobile and you want your child to be law abiding and the pillar of the society. And that is where the hope is. I was very interested to hear Ms. Thomas talk about the trigger, because indeed she's absolutely right. Experience has taught us that if you want a change, there must be a catalyst. And human experience has taught us that catalyst is usually war. The American Civil War, the French Revolution, going back to Roman days. And we spoke about Rwanda. But she raised an interesting point that for me has been something I've been chewing on, I've been cogitating on, that indeed what we are seeing in Guyana is the influx of foreigners. And we are so small that the change in culture is immediately visible. And you are seeing an increase in Guyanesism. You are seeing an increase in patriotism, a recognition that my cook-up and my achar is me. And the Brazilian influence and the Venezuelan influence and the American influence is so obviously in contrast to that, that the cook-up and achar combination that we know about, the curry and the roti and the black pudding that we know about, it merges, whether it is Afro-Guyanese or Indo-Guyanese, it becomes Guyanese. And I'm wondering if that trigger indeed might not be a recognition that our beautiful culture, to be preserved and to be maintained, needs to be maintained as a single unit, not pretending that we are several different peoples in this country. And perhaps the luxury that financial security will give us from gas and oil, if it is managed properly by a independent and honest political leadership, perhaps the financial security that we have as a people from that going into the future will allow us the luxury of indulging in an appreciation of our mutual culture, in contradistinction to the cultures which we are seeing being imported. And I hope that is the catalyst that perhaps will trigger an improvement in the social structure and appreciation of each other and the kind of healing that Paul says he observed in his Rwandan friend, who either would run mad or would become a virtual Buddhist after the kind of experience he had. We don't want that kind of experience, but we do need the healing. And perhaps there is a solution there on the horizon.
Thank you very much, Timothy. You mentioned achar and all that thing, but you didn't mention black pudding. My good friend David Hines might have been upset, but anyhow, that's for another story, another time. So now I'd like to ask my dear friend, Mr. Newton F. Haynes, who is a Guyanese American businessman, always on the move. And he is the president of the Roraima Institute. always in Guyana, always outside of Guyana, and always around the world. It's always difficult to catch up with him. Floyd, what's your take on this? The first question.
Well, I tend to look at it from different lenses as well. Clearly, the social fabric is torn, and you see it in things like increase in crime rate, violence against women, the decline in literacy rates, and all of those things. I wonder to what extent that is part of a global phenomenon. In other words, we're witnessing a world gone mad, and it's not unique to Guyana. Social media has ushered in an era where everybody is a broadcaster, and we have become uncivil in our critique. We no longer disagree without being disagreeable, as Dr. King would have said. You see some of the most vile things being said of each other on social media because it is not regulated anyway. You can get up there and you can attack person A, B, C. You can put all types of things, and the media now has become the source by which people get their information, and it's a very dangerous path we're going down on that sense. There is a breakdown in the politics because the sides aren't talking to each other. Now for the good news. The economics in Guyana is working. I see a country bursting at its seams with opportunities. There is more demand for just about any type of services you can imagine than there is supply. And that's going to continue for a long time. Whether it's a taxi service, dry cleaning service, hospitality service, you name it, there is an ever-increasing demand for it. And the real question is, are we as Guyanese prepared? And I worry that we are not prepared. And I think a huge step that we have to take as a people is to make sure that our Guyanese businesses, men and women, are prepared to take advantage of these opportunities that will come their way, because it will come. It is already coming. Guyana is on the move. They're doing a lot of things. Houses are being built. Hundreds of thousands of houses are being built. And the demand, I was over at Department of Housing, they've got some list about 70,000 or whatever the number was of people looking for homes. So the economics of it is encouraging. I am very encouraged. I see the activity, but I think the social fabric is torn and needs to be repaired.
Thank you very much, Floyd. Before we go on the break, I want to say that we have been broken because of migration. Half of our population were forced to leave the country, and they are living outside. And so we are broken, and there are those inside and those outside. And somehow we have to find, as we go forward, on how it can be repaired to build some bridges between those at home and those abroad. However, I saw a very scary video inciting racial violence in Guyana that really upset me, and this is why I think a program like this is very important. So we'll take a break and we'll come back and we'll talk a bit of whatever is broken, whatever is fractured, how it can be repaired. David?
It's the gifting time of the year, and send your loved one a special gift. Choose from these special gift boxes. Select a 4-meal box as a gift or one of our preset boxes, such as the duck and roti box or a doubles box. We also sell pastry gift boxes and roti gift boxes as well, and much more on allfromonesupplier.com. There's a gift box for everyone, even GT boxes and TNT boxes. Select your gift box and let us ship to your loved ones today. Log on to allfromonesupplier.com. This is a Save the Date announcement. Couples, family, relatives, and friends, save the date. We are taking our culture, music, and food on our vacation in 2022. Enjoy a vacation plus special events and entertainments. Here are the choices. Guyana Excursion May 4th to May 11th. Indian Talent Competition July 14th to July 18th in Punta Cana, Dominican Republic. Christian Community Week July 21st to July 25th in Punta Cana, Dominican Republic. Curry Duck Curry Competition July 28th to August 1st in Cancun, Mexico. Caribbean Week August 4th to August 8th in Punta Cana, Dominican Republic. Battle for the DJ Crown Soca, Indo, and Chutney Style August 11th to August 15th. Enjoy 5 days plus 4 nights all-inclusive vacation with your own cultural music, food, and entertainment. Meet and greet sessions with the performers and competition prizes. First place prize $2,000, second place $1,500, and third place $1,000. This is a save the date announcement by Travelspan. More information will become available in December. Travelspan, always on the cutting edge and serving you for over 27 years. Call 718-845-0437. That's 718-845-0437. Globespan 24/7 continues its efforts to serve the communities. The platform provides for all sides to air their views and discuss solutions. Viewers in Guyana and across the world are participating in these discussions. Globespan's platform offers Guyanese an opportunity to express their concerns and discuss solutions in the political realm, thereby addressing the polarized situation. Discussions also include social ills, such as alcoholism, domestic violence, and suicides that have been plaguing the people. The Globespan 24/7 platform connects the diaspora and the world with Guyana. So become a supporter of Globespan 24/7 today by clicking the badge icon on the lower right side of your screen. For only $10 a month, you will be a supporter of Globespan 24/7 initiative and have a badge displayed on your Facebook profile. Help us to continue to serve the communities.
We are here with a group of eminent guests, and we are discussing two questions. Is Guyanese society broken, and how can it be repaired? I had a last-minute recommendation by Lakshman Singh to bring on board a Miss Janet Murdoch, who is currently a peace and development advisor for Guyana and Suriname. So we'll give her 3 minutes to share a perspective on these two questions first. Thank you, Janet, for being here, and I look forward to bringing you back on Globespan for us to have a longer and more in-depth conversation.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here with you, Doctor, and fellow colleagues. Yeah, it's an interesting question. I guess what came to my mind is, we wake up every day and we have a new day and we try to do it right, and every day is a new chance to do something better. And lessons from yesterday, and we try to start over again. So that was the main idea that came to my mind. There's no basket we put in the broken countries in. We all have to get up the next day and work and go to work and try to be better. I think one of the ideas that come to mind also is that it's not so much the problems that are the problem, but it's the relational deficit that we have, in that we don't have the relationships and the ability to work together to solve the problems. So the problems need solving, but unless we have that relational element that's the glue to address them, then we will always face those situations, as a colleague said, of incivility to one another that doesn't allow us to get past our relational problems in order to address the real issues that need to be focused on. So I think we also all need to really work on those relational skills, and societies need to have mechanisms of grievance to channel disputes. And when those mechanisms don't exist or are broken down, people look for them. And in a way, I think the use of social media is people looking for channels to address grievances, and for the lack of them, people will go wherever they see an opportunity. So I think those are some of the reflections I have. Back to you.
I appreciate it very, very much, and we hope to have you back again in the future, because this is a subject that we are going to have to deepen our minds on.
Yeah.
So, my friend, Dr. Luncheon, I was at the presentation of your book on emotional lessons of emotional intelligence. How is that relevant to us rebuilding Guyana?
I think first of all, we need to understand that something like emotional intelligence does exist. And we ought to understand how it can help us in many facets of society. One of the first pillars of emotional intelligence is self-awareness. And if people are not aware that there are issues, if people are not aware that they have issues themselves, then that's a great place to start. So one of the good things about emotional intelligence is that you are not required to be, you don't necessarily need to be bright. It's not IQ based. So as long as you can understand emotions and you're able to control your own emotions, then you're able to relate those to other things in your life. So for instance, you're able to discipline children without necessarily beating them and causing further trauma, and perpetuating the stereotypes that our parents and grandparents did. And so now you find you can talk to children and they can reason, you can explain things to them and so on, and it's not just passing on the pain, as friends of mine would say. But first, if you understand what emotions are, and then you understand how to use them, then you can get things done. And it's important as managers, and most of all, but first of all, we manage ourselves. So it's important for managers to understand how those things work, and then you can relate it to other things. And so if you're getting people to come into a workplace and you come in as let's say you're the manager, you're the CEO or whatever, you walk in, you don't greet people in the morning. So you just go to your office, and then only when there's a problem that people come to you, so you don't interact. And you never ask questions. You don't know how people are, dealing with their day-to-day life and that sort of thing. You show no empathy. That sort of filters into the organization, and it filters out into society. And we ought not to have a siloed approach, because the thing is, we think that things belong in specific places and we tend to leave them there, but there's an overlap. And I think Mr. Jonas actually alluded to that overlap, because there's several different facets, especially once we get to the political directorate and how they would run things. So there are places there that you actually do need some level of emotional intelligence, but it begins with self. So if people are aware of who they are, and then they're able to control their own emotions, then of course we'd have things like a reduction in crime. You'd have a better school system, as Adriana had alluded to earlier. So that kind of thing, it's all related, and it could be at the center of how we actually get to fix Guyana. And I do think that Guyana could be repaired. It's certainly not a lost cause, but we first of all need to work together and remove the siloed approach that we see in a lot of the things that we're dealing with now.
Yeah, I like the concept of empathy. I think it's very important. Leadership without empathy is a prescription for disaster. It's a nightmare. And it should not just be leadership vertically, but horizontally. And
right. I like to tell people about being able to manage up.
Empathy is so important.
It is.
Floyd, you and I were in Washington, D.C. at a forum by the Center for Strategic Studies and the Republican Institute. And in your presentation, after everybody spoke, you said the elephant in the room was a race problem. What is your view of this in relation to what is broken and what has to be repaired?
Well, I think it's often exaggerated. I don't think the race problem is severe as one would have you believe. And this is my own opinion. Of course, it's heightened during election time, and the politics of it's over politicized. But a lot of this is fed largely in part by the social media, right? I think all Guyanese are looking for an opportunity to be their best selves. And I'm hoping that in this new dispensation, with the oil and the gas, and like I say, an opening up of the economy, that each and every Guyanese can feel that he or she has a part to play in this economy. And I think they do. Like I said before, the demand exceeds the supply by far, and it's going to get even worse. So perhaps that, the economic fix, can be a way to bring people together. You see, when people feel they're left out, don't have a seat at the table, they're not getting their piece of the action, it tends to trigger all kinds of emotions and all kinds of feelings. And that in turn is fueled by, again, the pundits who occupy the social media and sit from wherever they sit and fan the flames of fire. But I don't think it's as bad as one would have you believe. I think it's not irreparable. We do have pockets of racism on all sides. A doesn't like B because he doesn't look like him or her, and vice versa. But for the most part, I don't think Guyana suffers from that in a broader context. So I think the economic angle is one approach that I would see to help. Hold on. 1 second. Sorry about that. Hold on. Can you close it? I'm actually calling. I'm in Istanbul, so it's like 3 o'clock in the morning.
I saw the Arab garb.
Yeah. But at any rate, so I believe you can use the economic opportunities that will accrue in Guyana to help bridge some of that racial divide.
Wonderful, Floyd. I consider myself a voice for the grassroots. So when I look at Guyana and you speak of a place at the table, I'm on the side of the grassroots, regardless of your race, ethnicity, or your religion, or whatever. That's my main concern, because Guyana is the third poorest country in the hemisphere. We have a breakdown of infrastructure. We have a breakdown in the family. We have high rates of suicide. We have high rates of domestic violence, men killing their wives at every turn, twist, and so forth. So I could present to you about 20 indicators that confirms that there is a society in serious, serious trouble. Now, oil has come, but I could remember in the old day, in the 80s, flour was banned. And then Hoyt came back, and then he said he'd bring back flour after all the struggles. And you used to say Hoyt is throwing flour in our eyes. Now we are having oil thrown in our eyes. They're painting a cake that this oil is going to bring a lot of money, but people cannot eat a painting. They want the food on the table, they want the jobs. Now, from the statistics I've looked at, unemployment is going to continue to rise. So I don't want to hear about economic growth is 500% and we have growth without jobs. I don't want to hear we have 500% economic growth and it's growth without development, integral and holistic. So that's a quick perspective. So now I'll ask on Lakshman Singh, because he had a very brief consideration on the issue. Lakshman Singh, would you like to say anything?
Well, we're getting the depth of the conversation here, right? Because the perspectives of the panelists, I think, are unpacking the complexity of the issue. We, in many ways, if you think about the countries that have, if you will, become broken beyond the shadow of a doubt, you might ask yourself, well, how come Guyana hasn't fallen off, the wall quite as yet? Why are we not at war right now? You mentioned, Paul, about the poverty levels. We know about all of the indicators, violence, migration, suicide, and so on. And yet here we are, right? Still somehow, not imploding. And at the same time, I should also highlight folks like Timothy and I are doing our best to add to the mixed demographic, right? To make sure that this society becomes as blended as it possibly can be. And that's not an accident. This is not something that is just a blip. The society is integrating at a level that I think we really can't fully explain, but maybe it has to do with that, everybody eats cook-up, everybody eats curry. We have integrated at a certain level, and I think that's where we need to start at that. We have something quite solid in our society that we can build on. And going back to the picture of the traffic, we shouldn't be so fixated on the people who are trying to break the law. I'm amazed at how many people are staying in line, actually. I'm amazed at how many people are actually obeying the law. So whilst we're frustrated by the few who step out of line, I think an amazing number of people are trying to do the right thing. I like very much the points that the colleagues have been making about relationships. And of course, Dr. Luncheon starting with, it starts with us. So until we find ourselves as individuals, we're never going to find ourselves in family, and families are never going to find themselves in communities, and communities will never find themselves in the nation. But to get to that, I think requires a number of things. And let me report on something that happened a few years ago. There was a conference held at the Pegasus Hotel on trauma healing. We had about 100 and something practitioners from government, civil society, religious groups who came together to try and figure out what's going on with our society, and because we seem to be traumatized, and all of the indicators that we've talked about suggest that there's a high extent of pain and suffering in the society. We had 4 psychologists who visited us, volunteer psychologists who came from between the US and Canada. I think one was a Jamaican Canadian. And they were fascinated. They had never engaged on Guyana before. But what they said is that when they looked at our data and they read our history, which they were doing for the first time through this conference, they felt like Guyana had a national and a collective unhealed trauma, that things have happened to us over generations, perhaps over tens and dozens of years, going back to the 1800s, and none of us have really taken a systematic time to recover from that individually. And so the way they put it is like our society has trauma built into our DNA, and we get it as children and we pass it on to the next generation, and nothing is breaking that cycle. I found that fascinating as an explanation as to why it's hard for people to actually overcome things like hatred, enmity, discrimination, and to be a little bit more generous of spirit, be a little bit more caring. That is something we actually found in the UN. I was a program manager for a program 15 years ago that tried to work on social cohesion, and we ran an experiment. We took diverse people, like for example, YSM and PYO, took them to Lake Mainstay. In those days, they didn't have cell phones and internet. Took them off to a faraway place for a whole week. People who actually didn't get along, who were always fighting with each other, and took them away for a week and ran them through exercises and discussions about where are you from, who are you, who's your mother, what do you like, what do you think about this. Before a week had passed, these people had started to reconcile. They were building relationships that could last beyond that week in Mainstay. And the lesson that we took away from that is that if we spend dedicated periods of time trying to build relationships across people who usually don't get a chance to talk to each other, notwithstanding that democracy is supposed to provide us with a lot of spaces to talk to each other and to debate and dialogue, it actually is not happening. So I think we need to step back a bit. And the way the UN, I like the approach that they had. They talked about building a national capacity for peace. Peace is not something that gets injected in through somebody with a blue beret like yours, Paul, right, who comes in as a peacekeeper. No, the peace comes from within. People have to find an accord among themselves and find a way of relating to each other despite their differences, and we will have differences all the time. It's how do we develop the skills to actually have that negotiation between ourselves to find a common solution. Democracy, again, it's not just about elections, it's about the dialogue we do with each other between elections to help us actually reach a consensus somewhere in the middle. Nobody's going to get everything they want. Nobody should. And so, yeah, those for me are some incredible, encouraging experiences we've had in Guyana that suggest that if you think about the 2006 election, which is what the social cohesion program was working towards, we built a lot of relationships across the country, but you can't do that all the time. At some point, the society has to take over that function, whether it's through institutions like the Ethnic Relations Commission or government departments or civil society groups, religious groups. Everybody's got to get involved and somehow begin to work on that. We need to perhaps use, as Floyd is suggesting, the opportunity of the economy, but I worry about an overly economic approach. I think Trinidad makes me worry in the sense that, we may not, oil can only lubricate tensions for so long, but if we're not working on the fundamentals of the relationships, I do worry that we're going to be in trouble. So yeah, that's my extended contribution this time, Paul.
Wonderful. I'd like to, an anecdote. Here in America, somebody told me, during the riots, people ran and stole television and they're running away. But when the traffic light came on and it came red, they stopped. They obeyed the law. Anyhow, that's a bit of fun. I teach both Black politics and series of subjects in criminal justice studies. And we have a raving debate right now, and I'm reading extensively on it, on the critical race theory, which really basically touches on what you're talking about. And I'm both a historian, a political scientist, and we have to look within Guyana properly at the history of conquest, the history of slavery, the history of indentureship, and 20th century colonialism, how it impacted on our psyche and so on and so forth. So I am with you there. And I agree with you that we can't be just having programs from the UN, because I knew a guy in 2000, I did a study on poverty in 2005 for ActionAid International, and I interviewed him, and he was doing a similar job like Janet Murdoch, and you all were involved with Pandit Krishna Prasad and all of you. So couple of years from election to election is almost like carnival in Trinidad. When carnival is over, we start preparing for another carnival. When an election is over, you guys start preparing to make sure the election don't blow up when it blow up. And I agree with you there. We got to be, that got to come to an end. And we have to institutionalize, and we got to get more mature. Anyhow, thank you guys very much for all these input. Now, Adriana, before I go to Timothy, what's your reaction to all this conversation?
I like this conversation.
Wonderful.
I like Lawrence said, we are unpacking Guyana, and the conversation is important. But I believe that we have to move the conversation beyond being diagnostic to being prescriptive, and to moving beyond that. I think for a long time we've been diagnostic. We've been diagnosing what is the problem, what really is the problem, what really, and then we do a little bit of, we get a little prescriptive, but I think we need to move beyond that. For change to happen, 3 elements are key. Guyana needs to have the ability to change. We need to ask ourselves, do we have the ability to change or for change? The second element is the capacity for change. Do we have the capacity for change? And the third, which is a fundamental aspect, is do we have the will to change? So all these things that we're talking about, we can make these things excuses for the next 55 years, for the next 100 years, that, we've been under colonial rule, and then we've had issues in the 1960s, and then the elections, we have elections issues. Do we have the will to change? If we don't have the ability, then let's build the ability. Do we have the capacity? Let's build the capacity. Do we have the will? And I guess some people will say that it's not as easy as that, Adriana. But I will keep raising China and India in particular. China was able to move over 600 million people out of extreme poverty. So when I think of Guyana and I think of, and India, almost the same amount. So when I think of Guyana and I think of what is possible, I ask myself, Paul, Lawrence, Miss Timothy, Dr. Luncheon, Mr. Haynes, let's ask ourselves, how did China do it? How did China lift 600 million people out of extreme poverty? How did India do it? How did Rwanda recovered from a terrible civil war, political will? This brings me to the next point, that very often we don't want to deal with leadership. We have not gotten our leadership right. Let's talk a little about what Dr. Luncheon talked about in terms of the self-awareness. All things are created twice. First of all, there must be the mental creation and then the physical creation. If at the level of the leadership, there isn't that sense of self-awareness and that mental creation of the possibilities of what Guyana can be, how Guyana can move past the issues and the pains and the hurt, like what happened in Rwanda, how we can move 782,000 people out of poverty, like Rwanda did. Let me give you an example in Guyana currently. Currently, when I look at Guyana's economy, last year, the Guyanese economy grew by the GDP by 43.5%, I think. Now, with an economy that grew by 43.5%, in 2019, I think we grew by 4-point-something%. So 43-point-something%, that's many times more than what we did in 2019. And even going back to the days of when we had a 2.5% growth or a 3% or a 3.5% growth. This year, our half-year report in terms of how the economy did was, I think, 14.3% or something to that effect. What it means is that there is a lot of money being turned around in the Guyanese society and is passing through the Guyanese society. But yet, at the level of our leadership, we are thinking scarcity. With an economy that's growing, Guyana is going to be the fastest growing economy in the world with 7, and the population has not changed. So why then scarcity is an issue? It means that the pie is big enough for all of us as well as those who are coming. And I think we need to, when we talk change, we need to address the question of leadership. And in terms of whether our leadership has that mental creation to create a Guyana that will be the fastest growing economy in the world, where all 82,000 people can benefit equally because there's more than enough resources. The other point that I'd like to make, I see the economics as playing a fundamental role, but in terms of the entry point to bring us together. Because with 782,000 people, I see it in terms of 782,000 people in terms of a customer base. And if we had more people, it means that the cost to go across the Berbice Bridge would have been less. So, but we're 782,000 people, divided people. So I see the economics as an entry point in terms of we're interdependent on each other from the perspective of whether you're Blacks or Indians or Chinese or Portuguese or Amerindians, we're customers. We're customers of the banks, we're customers of the, so that economic sense. The other point I'd like to make before is that if we, and I have shared Lawrence's concern in terms of the economics, nothing just happens. We have to make things happen, except we strengthen our institutions. We're going to have that top. I see Guyana's economy shaped like a triangular shape. At the apex, we have a small super rich. And with the economics that we're talking about, the oil, they will get super, super rich. And then there's a small middle class, and there's a huge bottom. What we need to do is to change the shape of the Guyanese economy, like Singapore's economy. to a diamond shape, where we narrow the bottom there, that broad base at the bottom. Okay, so we flatten the top where we have that apex with that small group. We flatten that by putting more people at the top there, or helping more people to get there. And then what you do, you bring up the masses from the bottom of the triangle to the middle of the diamond shape. So you have in that middle there, you widen the middle class. So what you have there, you have middle class values, because in order to have the changes that we're talking about, we need middle class values. So we need to find a way to narrow that base of the triangle, bring people up to the middle of the diamond and expand that middle class there. And that's where we'll have the values. My final point is, when we talk about the broken family and all these other individual and institutional things which are broken, it comes back to value system. Every single thing that we do, we filter those things through our value system. So even at the level of our leadership, they filter these things through their value system. So in what is the value system? Is the value system to have one Guyana, to move towards one people, one nation, one destiny? Or is the value system to get my group into position of leadership? And then what? What about governance after that? What about development? What about equity and those kinds of things? So to sum all of this up, I would like to say that one, we need to address our leadership. And our leadership has to have that mental picture of a Guyana that is, that will, on a united Guyana. The second thing is, we need to be able to strengthen our institutions. Our institutions are the filters through which the masses, the poor, they're going to come up to that middle class, because nothing just happens. And the last point that I'd like to make is that we need to focus more on bridging and bonding. I think particularly Guyana is at a point now where we can become the best of the best or the worst of the worst. But I think fundamental to that is that self-awareness at the level of the leadership as individuals, as institutions, the organization of the leadership, and the societal aspect in terms of how the leadership is influencing and orienting the followership.
Okay, thank you. You raised the point about the middle class. That's the concept here in the US about the middle class. It's linked to the concept of the American dream, that we expand the middle class. However, in 55 years, we have had leadership from the top, and it has not resolved the problems of that majority at the bottom. So I'd like to see ideas about rethinking leadership from below, and how leadership from below. And that's why I have a strong view about local government and what local government can do. You know, I lived in various parts of Guyana, several places in Berbice, the East Coast, Bartica, and about 5 places in Berbice. I know the quarantine very well, from Mara to Crabwood Creek. From the time I was born there and went to high school and all that, and I keep going there 2-3 times a year, what happens? Nothing has changed in Berbice. All we have there is sugar, rice, and vegetables, and the markets that we have. Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. Guyana is like a treadmill. It's not an escalator, it's a treadmill. It's a country where it's like Young and the Restless. You see it today, don't see it 5 years from now, you catch up with the story. It's the same old story. Now we're talking about oil. I wrote a book on the Venezuelan oil industry. I spent 2 years researching the oil industry. I wrote on nationalization. I went to Dubai and I did a workshop on gas and oil with Nigerian officials from the National Oil Company of Nigeria. And I put my students, about 100 of them over the various semesters, to ask how has the poor people benefited in country X from the oil revenues. In the global south, nobody has. So we have to approach this oil with a great degree of, we have to include the Guyanese people in the conversation about oil. They have to participate. There got to be transparency and accountability. And Floyd and I did a television program on it, on whether Guyanese will benefit, and we've gone through all those arguments and so forth. Anyhow, Timothy.
Can I just quickly make a point here that and this is where it comes back to having the will. There are countries like developing countries, for example, that are resource-rich countries, and they're using the resources well to develop their countries. Examples are Chile, Botswana, some of the Gulf, the countries in the Gulf. We have those are developing countries. We have developed countries like Canada, Australia, the United States. Those are examples that we can draw from in terms of how resources are being used. And this is where I also like to make the point of...
You know what you remind me, Adriana, when I was on the political platform, I'm always making the last point. Anyhow, go ahead, make your last point.
I would also like to say that one of the things that people say to me that, Adriana, what are you doing to yourself? Because I said that I'm running for president. And people will say, what are you doing to yourself? You're destroying yourself. And I said to them that except somebody like me step up, it's called stepping up. Because what is needed is the people who can make a change in terms of leadership are too comfortable. They're in the middle class. And someone said that people want change, but they want things to remain the same. People are too comfortable. There's a price that you may have to pay. And so what I'm happy about is to see people like Lawrence and Timothy and coming forward, because they are the ones who will help to create the change, like Yog Mahadio. These people are so important to that process of change. It would not just happen. It is people who have middle class values, who are from the middle class, but very often are too reluctant to come forward because of the comforts that they have at that level. And so I'm not saying this to be disrespectful, but I'm making a factual and practical point. And so one of the things that's changing in Guyana is that in our society, our communication is more implied as against expressed. One of the things that's changing is that for people like Lawrence and Timothy and other people who are fundamental to this change, their communications are becoming more expressed. And that is extremely, extremely important to the process of change, to move us from this current state to that transition state, and then to an actual future state.
Thank you very much. Timothy, what's your reaction to all this, Senior Counsel?
There's so much to answer. I don't know how much time you have, Paul.
I don't have a lot of time. Just take the most strategic one. The lady just threw a challenge to you. I don't know if you saw it. It was like a Google.
Start at the beginning with what Dr. Luncheon said, and that I absolutely agree with, and I think it's the fundamental starting point: self-awareness. We are all prejudiced. We all have prejudices. We all have biases, and we all, to me, have to start by a self-analysis to see where we fall short. Because if we fall short, then we shouldn't even embark on trying to correct the people around us. And I like what Lawrence talked about, the retreat he had at Lake Mainstay. All of us, it's wonderful that if you have an opportunity to do that, but very few of us do. Most people are scrabbling to earn a daily bread, to earn a daily living, don't have the time to go on a forum like that. And I think that it's important for our leaders and those who can do it to go on that kind of forum where they can interact, interface, and meet each other and get to know each other, because that's so important to reduce the prejudices that we have. But for those who cannot do it, the institutions need to augment situations where they are thrust into sharing situations. I see it in sports. I think it happens in schools. We can see it so clearly in Guyana that in the urban areas in Georgetown, for example, the interactions between groups in schools allows for such an easy coexistence that does not exist in so many of the villages where people are more insulated, and it is easier to maintain the age-old traditions that they have. So we need to be able to look at ourselves, to recognize the truth in ourselves, to hear the truth, because we can't fix things. I'll give you an example. The other day, young Charles Ramson made a stupid comment talking about the absence of role models. I say it was a stupid comment because as a politician and as an Indo-Guyanese politician, as a member of the PPP, it was politically stupid. The criticism he got was so extensive. Nobody troubled to look at the content of what he's saying and the example he gave. He spoke about his father, who came home every day to his nuclear family, brought home his salary to his nuclear family, put his children through school. Now in Guyana, 60% of us are born out of wedlock. More than half of us grew up in single parent or extended parent, aunties and uncles or grandparents households. It is so much more difficult for a child growing up with one income, one parent, trying to do the job of two parents. It's so much more difficult for that child to succeed than for another child who has the luxury of two parents, that stability, that care. And poor Ramson got lambasted for holding up his father, who a lot of people criticize, as a model of what we need. I'd like to say that if we look within and if we look at us as Guyanese, we have to think about the family model. We have to think about how important that is for our children coming up. Now, I liked what Adriana said about moving from a diagnostic to a prescription, to a recipe. We're a part company with hers. I don't think she did it in her discussion. Because the example she gave, she said strengthen institutions, reduce the wealth disparity, increase middle class, focus on bonding. Now, that is not a prescription. That needs to condescend to particulars. We need to have an idea of how those general pipe dreams can be made reality. And I think that is what a prescription is. Now, we've seen huge changes in Guyana, in the society, and I don't think a lot of us have recognized where they come from. Dr. Luncheon talked about corporal punishment. She's obviously an opponent of corporal punishment. I could hug her for that, because it's a huge problem in Guyana. Where does it come from? It comes from our legacy of slavery and indentureship. Because in an unjust social structure, where you cannot show the justice of your laws and your rules so that you can, by moral force, by moral strength of the justice of what you are doing, persuade people to obey you, you got to beat them. And we have grabbed that and we have passed that on to our children, making our children into images of what we inherited from our masters. When you look at the places that Adriana's talking about, they're not beating their children. They used to do it long ago. There was nobody the cat o' nine in the British Navy, but they stopped. And when they stopped is when you saw the kind of renaissance that allowed their middle class to blossom, to bloom, to explode, expand. We in Guyana still like to talk about discipline being important. Bill Gates never marched in no military national service scheme. Neither did Rockefeller, neither did Henry Ford. So we need, if we are going to try to emulate those people that we want to emulate, if we want to borrow from others, we need to carefully analyze ourselves to see our own failings. And then we need to identify what we want from those places. Television is something that if you hear the old people talk, oh, it's terrible, it's instilling bad values and all of that. Television is an interesting place because it allows Guyanese who are mired and moored in our little island, our little time capsule here on the mud dam. It allows us to see the possibility of what exists outside, to see mommy and daddy hugging their children, to see their children skipping joyfully rather than being seen and not heard. And by allowing us, by pure accident, to see that possibility, you see parents in Guyana now treating their children differently. And you see the children more articulate, more assertive, more confident, happier. So we need to identify where we are growing and where we can learn from, and we need to embrace it. Because in doing that, we will allow our middle class to grow. We can't just say, oh, we must strengthen our institutions. We have to condescend on to particulars. How do we do that? Let us structure our social welfare. Let us acknowledge that for social bonding, education can't just be the 3 R's, but you got to put those children on a field of sport. You have to put musical instruments in their hand. You have to encourage them in debating and in the extras and in the arts, so that in their interaction with each other, you have a Hooper and you have a Chandrapal, or you have a Dr. Joseph and a Dr. Ramsahai. That is how the bonding happens. But we need to condescend on particulars.
Floyd, would you share a brief reflection with us on all this? You're very good at summarizing stuff as a businessman.
Absolutely. I agree in part with Adriana. I wouldn't use China. China is not a democracy. And so we don't want to use the means that China used. Now, the role of government is to deliver public goods and services efficiently and to help and take care of the vulnerable section of our population, period, and create an enabling environment. The private sector is the engine of growth in any economy. And it seems like to me that's where we start. We have to strengthen our private sector. How do we strengthen the private sector? I mean, you look at our entrepreneurial community. They're not, it's a very small 4 or 5 families that's been there since I was a little boy, and then the rest of them are one-man, 2-man show. We have to strengthen our private sector with training, education. We have to develop the skills. We have to effect a knowledge and a skills transfer by bringing diaspora talent back. Those are some specifics. But more importantly, we need a culture of development, right? The private sector is not just about setting up a business and say I'm selling widgets or I'm selling paint or I'm a contractor. There's an attitude that goes into being a business owner. There's an attitude or a culture of risk-taking, right? The whole, and therein lies the revolution of values. Because what I am observing is that we are not prepared to take advantage of those opportunities. And if we're not prepared, as the man in the street say, cats can eat our dinner, breakfast, and lunch. We have to prepare ourselves. And it starts with the training that is required, the business training, and then the values that accompanies the behavior when you're a business person. You don't just show up. I've been part of a few delegations over the last couple of months, and our entrepreneurs come in there with no plan. And they said, well, I can't get a loan to borrow. Well, what does your balance sheet look like? You don't just get a loan like that. The government creates the enabling environment, and I believe there is leadership on that front. I have heard firsthand, the government is saying, listen, we will assist, we will help, we'll provide the enabling environment. But you've got to come prepared. You've got to be able to show that, A, you've put together your business plan, you've done your market research, you've got your financials, you've got your cash flow statements, and then you bring the kind of attitude and values. Part of it is that emotional intelligence that Dr. Luncheon talked about. Development, there is a culture of development. All of these countries, Adriana talking about, if you look at them closely, they have a culture of development. People show up to work on time. They bring certain values to the table. And I believe if we can help do that, we're still young into this oil business. I'm not as skeptical. I'm cautiously optimistic. We as the people have to hold government accountable. But I like what I see. President Ali has been in office 1.5 years, and I think he's done an amazing job. This is my personal opinion. We have to hold him accountable and make sure that the benefits of everything that comes out of this redounds to the Guyanese people. And if we don't hold the government accountable, then we have no one blame but ourselves. But we've got to develop the private sector. It's the engine of growth in any economy. Government doesn't grow anything.
Thank you, Floyd. Amala, I'll give you 1 minute to give us a word of wisdom.
Thank you. I think one of the things that we need to do is really, I would say, assess mental health, because a lot of us still have that same trauma that I spoke about before. I work with people who I know are still suffering from the effects of having lived through what happened to Walter Rodney. Recently, a friend of mine, this week, her dad died, and she was posting that he was very fond of Walter Rodney and of Shirley Field Ridley. And it came down all the way to her, and people that she knows, people are still suffering from the fact that there really was no sort of mental health counseling to come from the trauma that people had to repress during that era. And people are living through it. People can talk about their parents. This one person that I work with, he said the first time he saw his dad cry was when Walter Rodney died, and he was his neighbor. And so he now is in his 60s and still has not dealt with that trauma. So there are things that we carry, and we don't realize that we're carrying them until someone starts to talk about it, and those things filter into our daily lives. We've become a very resilient people, but it's because we're resisting a lot of things. And so, again, we still need to go back to understanding who we are. And I think we also need to work on listening, and listening actively, as opposed to listening to just respond, because that's all that we do. We really don't want to hear what someone else is saying, but wait, it's my turn now, let me just say something. And we're not really listening in a way that we understand what our brother or sister is really saying. In terms of flattening the middle class, or widening the middle class, flattening the lower class, I would like to say if something is going to be prescriptive, we need to know how long this is going to take. Because we can say that we would like to flatten it and we want to bring more people up, but in what time period? And how do we do that? We also have to look at education, because now we're way into this having oil business. But I guess in some instances, we're bringing in people from Trinidad and so on. But are we actually using them as mentors in the way that they're meant to be used? Or are they usurping the roles that people in Guyana should have? So those are just some of the things that I think we need to look at.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
With Lakshman Singh, I share the fact that we're both Catholics. I am I've been to a lot of cursillos. I know the importance of it. I went to Catholic College in Oxford. I studied moral philosophy, ethics, all the social teachings. I'm aware of it. I'm a strong believer that a very important role in Guyana for the healing of our country and for fixing this problem has to do with the interfaith organizations. Because one of the positive things about our society is that Hindus, Muslims, and Christians have lived on that land space in a way that I had not seen in many, many, many countries across the world. So I agree with you all in overall that we have to begin to reflect deeper on our existence, on our evolution, to see what is positive, what is negative, and how we address it. Our time is running out, and I want to share with you all some of the work that I did in the 80s and the way I saw the society in the 80s, and leave a word for a call of unity as I did in the 80s. Devin, can you put those things up? This was the Right to Work Association. When I got fired at UG, I took the money and I rented an office in Regent Street, and I put up a big sign. Things have fallen apart. The center cannot hold. Jobs gone, roti gone, bread gone, dignity gone. And we have to, only the people can save the people. And I put the clock to midnight. Put the other one up. This is a booklet I wrote, Guyana Nation in Ruins, 1982. Put the next one up. And this is the House of Israel guy killing Dr. Father Dark in the street. Guyana Nation Too Young to Die. Put the next one up.
is another day in another phase in an attempt to bring a new life to our people's struggle, our people's hope. Today, my brothers and sisters, was a march for unity and of unity. Today, my brothers and sisters, was a march for resistance and of resistance. Today was a march of hope, because again and again, as a multiracial people, we must always salute and always give credit to whatever attempt is made in whatever way to bring Indian and African, Chinese and Amerindian, Portuguese and all the ethnic groups of our nation together under one banner and one cause.
So I say Guyana is my first love, probably for all of us. It's our first love. And it's Christmas time. And we have 3 minutes, so I'll give everybody a minute to wish Guyanese at home and abroad, whatever you'd like to wish them. Let's start with Adriana. We're not hearing you.
Muted.
Oh, go ahead. No? Oh.
I would like to wish our fellow Guyanese Merry Christmas and best wishes for 2022. I'm excited about the future of Guyana. And I think that we will become one of the best countries. Thank you, Mr. Tennessee. And thank you for all of my other colleagues on this program for having me as a part of this excellent work.
Thanks, Paul. Yes, of course, we want to wish everybody a very safe Christmas season. There's a lot that can go wrong between COVID and, over imbibing, shall we say. Lots of things we need to watch out for. I would certainly wish that all Guyanese could take a moment during this time ahead to sort of give thanks for the year that has passed, for the life that we still live, and also to reflect on what we would like to be different in 2022. We have a lot of power in our hands. We don't need to just toss it up to God and say, well, you deal with it. We can deal with a lot of things, and we have a lot of power that comes from above. So I would urge everyone to sort of consider the role that they can play in making Ghana a much better place come 2022.
Lloyd?
Well, I want to wish my fellow panelists, we say Happy Christmas and a safe and prosperous New Year. I want to wish all of Guyana, including the diaspora, Happy Christmas. And with individuals like my fellow panelists, I feel optimistic and good about the future of Guyana.
Timothy?
We're in good hands.
1-2 sentences to the Guyanese people?
I think what came out of this discussion was introspection, and I was very heartened to see that Dr. Luncheon introduced it and Ms. Thomas so immediately and quickly embraced it. I know that it is something that's Floyd has talked about for a long time, and that Lawrence has discussed. So I would like to say to Guyanese who are so quick to judge that perhaps we can have a season of introspection, looking at ourselves, think about stopping for pedestrians at the zebra crossing and not overtaking on the inside, and showing some courtesy and just introspection. And let us see if our society can be made better, starting with ourselves, rather than from criticizing others.
Amala, because of time, I give you 30 seconds.
Well, Merry Christmas to Guyanese at home and abroad, and to friends of Guyana, because we still have people who are willing to help us make our society better. So Merry Christmas to everyone.
On behalf of Globespan, and on behalf of Devin and Nohar, who are responsible for this program, I'd like to say a happy Christmas to all Guyanese and a safe and healthy New Year. Until next time, I'm Paul Newell, Tennessee for Globespan. Thank you.